Okay, we've reached 99 people so far, so I think we'll go ahead and begin. There, we've got 100. Definitely, we will begin. So good evening and welcome to the League of Women Voters of Broward County's first event of the new year. This is sponsored by our Education Committee and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. This event is in collaboration with the Anti-Racism Task Force of Christchurch United Methodist. And I want to give a big thank you to Susan Sprague, who is a member of both organizations and who is doing a wonderful job putting this together, as well as Margie Roback, who is chair of our Education Committee. And other collaborators will be mentioned shortly. My name is Monica Elliott, and I am the current president of the Broward League. And I will also be one of the moderators for this evening, along with Pastor Nathan Adams with Christchurch United Methodist. I first want to begin with a little bit of Zoom etiquette, although I think probably everybody is used to this by now, but we are going to have a large group. We had 168 registered and we've got 103 already. So we've got a very large group, which is really exciting. And so to keep everything smoothly, we've just got a few rules. One, please be sure to mute your microphones. If you don't do it, the moderators or the support staff will do it for you. And only the moderators and the panelists will be allowed to speak unless the moderators ask for an audience member to speak. We just need to keep everything under control with a large group. We also suggest that you may, in the audience, want to turn off your video cameras. This makes for less distraction overall and keeps the focus on our panelists. I would also remind you that usually in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little box that says view, and you can either put it in speaker mode so that only the speaker is showing up, or you can leave it in the gallery mode. And then there is closed captioning, which is available for those who wish to use it. Lastly, we are recording. We have the permission of all the panelists to record this event, and so that is what we are doing. So the League is a nonpartisan organization, meaning that it never supports or opposes candidates or parties. At the same time, the League is wholeheartedly political and works to influence policy through advocacy. The League is community-based. We work to improve our government and engage all citizens in the decisions that impact our lives. Tonight's topic title is Don't Say Education. Panelists will be discussing how recent legislation is or will affect the classroom, especially the K through 12 classrooms. Now, you may be asking, why is the League interested in what happens in education? Don't you just focus on voter registration and elections? And the answer is no, we do much more. Every year, the League decides what action issues it will support in the coming year. For the 2022-2023 fiscal year, we agreed to support a curricular framework that has broad, common standards developed by educational experts that serves as a guide to local districts. These frameworks should promote diversity and non-discrimination based on race, ethnicity, religion, gender identity, nationality, and ability status, and also include the historic mandates to teach Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and African American history. And we adopted that statement directly from the State League's program. To say the least, we've been disturbed by and advocated against many of the educational bills that passed in the 2022 legislature. These include HB 7, Individual Freedom Act, but also known as Stop Woke Act, which in part prohibits classroom instruction and curricula from being used to indoctrinate or persuade students in a manner inconsistent with certain principles or state academic standards. HB 1467 is an act relating to K through 12 education, which in part modifies laws governing the selection and discontinuance of instructional materials in public school curricula and libraries. Susan, you're trying to put the slide up? I don't think it's working. The last bill that we're concerned with is HB 1557, the Parental Rights in Education Act, but also known as Don't Say Gay bill, which in part prohibits classroom instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity in kindergarten through grade 3, or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students. So for tonight's program, we will begin with each panelist providing an opening statement, and then the moderators are going to ask questions of each panelist. However, because Senator Jones must leave at 8 p.m., we will hear his opening statement and ask him questions before moving on to the other panelists. We have some prepared questions, but we welcome the audience to place their questions in the chat box. And we will try to get as many questions as possible, and will likely consolidate questions if they're similar in content. So again, any questions should be placed in the chat box. And it would be greatly appreciated if you just use the chat box for questions, just to make it easier for the moderators to sort through what's going on there. And now I will turn it over to Pastor Nathan Adams, who will also be moderating.
Thank you so much, Monica. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us here this night. Thank you to all of our panelists and to our team that's helping to make tonight possible. Before we jump in and get to hear Senator Jones share with us this evening, I just want to also, in addition to our partners at the League of Women Voters of Broward County and Christ Church United Methodist, I just want to take a moment to also thank and to recognize our other collaborators tonight and in this larger work that we all do together. And so we want to say thank you to all of these partners and organizations, including the Grandis Cherry Black Women's Lawyers Association, Children's Services Council of Broward County, History Fort Lauderdale, Women of Color Empowerment Institute, Bread for the World, Partners in Racial Justice, Young Professionals Network of the Urban League of Broward County, and the Racial Equity Council of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce. Could we give them all a virtual clap and appreciation for all the work that you're doing in our community and around the state. Thank you all so much for that. Indeed, friends, tonight, again, Christ Church is one of our many folks helping to put this on. We are people of religion, and so we're going to start with a prayer to kind of focus us in, and then we'll begin our time here together. I invite you to be in an attitude of prayer, whatever that might be for you, or in a time of reverence. Let's pray together, friends. Our holy creator of us all, we gather tonight giving thanks for the opportunity to do so. We thank you for all of those who will be presenting tonight, those watching, and for all of those who have led in making tonight happen. We proclaim that you make us uniquely as we are, no matter what shade our skin might be, no matter who we fall in love with, no matter where we live, nor the accent we speak with, no matter if we pray regularly or never have before or never will. We know that you have created us just as we are. Indeed, no matter how we or others might define or describe ourselves, you tell and show us that we all matter and are of sacred worth. We know that we don't always recognize the sacred worth of one another or others, especially those we might label as different. We so often ignore one another or try simply to not talk about our differences, insisting somehow that protects us or makes life easier. Help us to do better. Help those who seek to lead us to do better, not just for themselves, but for all Floridians. We can and we must do better. And so we come tonight to learn, and so that we can and do better. So help us to do so. On a night when we have gathered to discuss education, we give you thanks. We thank you as indeed tonight for our educators across our state doing their best to teach us and all. We thank you for faculty members and administrators. We thank you for support staff such as custodians and bus drivers. And of course, we thank you for our students who look to us to do and to say what is best for them, all of them. Remind us tonight and always that indeed you created and love each and every one of us and everyone. Help us to live that out tonight and always. We offer this prayer to you with humility and in hope. Amen and amen. Now, friends, it's my pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce our first panelist tonight. Tonight, we're going to hear first from State Senator Shevrin Jones, who's going to be talking about us a little bit of our recent legislation that Monica has offered and talked about already tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about Senator Jones. Thank you so much, Senator Jones, for being with us. So Florida State Senator Chev Jones is an educator, a public servant, and a consensus builder who gets results on the issues facing Florida families. After teaching AP chemistry in Broward County at Florida Atlantic University High, Jones' first-hand look at the inequities in education and society at large propelled him to enter public service. He first served in the Florida House of Representatives prior to his election to Florida's 34th Senate District, representing Northeast Miami-Dade County, and currently serves as the Vice Chair of the Appropriations Committee on Education and a member of the Pre-K through 12 and Post-Secondary Education Committees. Senator Jones is completing his PhD in Educational Leadership at Florida Atlantic University and was recently appointed to President Biden's Board of Advisors on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. Welcome, Senator Jones. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Pastor Anthony. It's good to be here with you all today. I do want to give a shout out to Monica and to the entire league, because you all, what you stand for is not just helpful to us in our communities, but nationwide, keeping us informed on those things that truly matters here in this country. So thank you again. And to all of you who are here, I appreciate this opportunity to be with you all today to not just talk about the problems that we experienced in this last legislative session, but I like what Monica said, that each panelist, we're going to talk about what the action plan will look like moving forward and what we can do to organize and galvanize to move this forward. I want you all to think about this number. There were 250% of gag orders that was introduced across this country in 2021. It was up from 250% of educational gag orders. And that was according to a study that was done. It defines that many of these state legislative efforts to restrict in the teaching of the topics such as race, gender, and African-American history, or true American history. We are in a time right now within this country and within this state to where it's a bandwagon approach that we're seeing, to where Florida, like we've seen in this last legislative session and in the last legislative session preceding this, the one we just came out of, we've seen these continued attacks on the human experience. It is a total travesty that even in this last legislative session, when we saw and we continue to see the prices of homeowners insurance and everything else continue to rise, the governor and my Republican colleagues, they continue to generate headlines about Florida for all the wrong reasons. And we know what those reasons are. And let's start with the Don't Say Gay bill, or what they have couched it as parental rights in education. But mind you, for those who have been following everything that we've been doing in the legislature for the past 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, we've done a parental rights in education bill. So when you look at 2022 and you ask yourself, what was the reasoning behind this? It was clear. There was a direct attack on the LGBTQ community. And so the Don't Say Gay bill, as it has colloquially become known as, was one of the many attacks on our most vulnerable communities. And that is our LGBTQ community. The culture wars that we're dealing with here within the state of Florida, it reigned not just here in this state, but it transcended from this state. And that was the tone that we saw all across the country. It is discriminatory pieces of legislation like this that fails to I truly believe, that it fails to deal with the critical issues that really impacting all of us in our lives on a daily basis. The things that we see, that we saw in this last legislative session, let's be honest, we're going to see those same things again moving into this next legislative session. But beyond my perspective on a lot of these things, as a Black man, as a gay man, as a human being living in this state here in Florida, yeah, and also as a former educator, yeah, I want to make it clear that we are in tough times as we look to what this current leadership is looking to do. But I believe even as elected officials, even in last session, we have a responsibility to not just improve the lives of people, not improve the lives of our daily lives, but we have an obligation to ensure that we're leaving something intact for our young people, for them to look forward to, and for them to work towards. But instead of us progressing, what we saw last legislative session, we saw a total regression. And this blatant hostile war that we're seeing on our basic human rights and the interruption of anybody's human experience, I'm almost sure that no one in their right mind will even agree with what we're seeing going across here with the over 200 million people who live here. Even looking at the CRT, as they call it or they name it as, there is no school right now from pre-K to 12th grade that is teaching anything about the critical race theory. Those of you who are or have done any master's program in education or even educational law or anything, and you've taken a course on critical race theory, I can guarantee you no child will want to even deal in that topic. That's how difficult the topic is. This made up idea that the Republicans have come up with to ban critical race theory, not only is it a distraction, but it's dangerous. It is a dangerous attempt to totally whitewash and rewrite history for the sake of political expediency. It's not a real issue that Florida families face in the daily lives, but it is a continued latest dog whistle that we continue to see that is spewing across this country. Whether it is trying to muzzle teachers from what they can and they cannot say, or even to what we're seeing currently right now within our colleges and universities, where the governor has made it extremely clear that I want to see if you're using state resources to encourage DEI training. This is the Florida that we live in. But I know for a fact, and I'm clear on one thing, that this is not the Florida that we are. And rather than getting up false outrage and manufacturing so many of these different cultural wars, I really welcome my Republican colleagues to do something different. I welcome them to come down to my district in Opelika and deal with the infrastructure problem and our water that we've been dealing with for the past 8 years that continue to get vetoed. I welcome them to go down further, down to Homestead, to deal with the children and the reading issues that we're dealing with because they're not reading with proficiency. That's what I would much rather them do. But that's not what we're seeing in Tallahassee. And even as we move forward, until we as a people, we realize that what we are seeing, that we're sick of it, which I know we are, but us really galvanizing people to make it clear that this is not the state that we live in, they will continue to with this because I can mentality. But I truly am confident that after this last election, people are not only fed up, people are tired of us being the laughingstock of this country. And I think we saw that this last legislative session, and I think we will continue to see it. But here's my hope. My hope is that as we move into this legislative session, individuals like you who have constantly and always been in the fight and always been on the ground, that we do not get weary right now, because that is exactly what and how they want us to do right now in this moment, because it's crazy and chaos calls for people to quit sometimes. And it's my hope that we can just stay vigilant and that we continue to have these dialogues. But I'm gonna go back to what y'all said, but we can do action even after the dialogue. I appreciate you all, and I'm looking forward to questions or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Jones. We appreciate that. And what a good reminder to us all to not grow weary. It is tiring and hard work, but indeed to not grow weary. I think our first question, I think you can approach it from a couple of different ways. But simply, if you could see any piece of legislation passed, but I guess that's something you're running or working on, or if you see something else kind of down the line that we need to be aware of, what would that be? So
I'm gonna be extremely honest with you. I think if our healthcare budget is the largest budget, one of the largest budgets in the state outside of education. And I know it might sound, and I might sound like a broken record because we talk about it every single year, but it's so important, and that's Medicaid expansion. After COVID, our Medicaid rolls have continued to grow, and the state of Florida has continued to ignore the fact that we have the ability to take dollars that the federal government is trying to give us to ensure that people have adequate health care. It is not just the state legislature continue to try to fill these holes that we don't have to continue to do. But we continue to do that and spending more money. I believe if we would do the right thing and make sure individuals have the access and ensuring that the doctors that are within these a lot of urban areas, that we are incentivizing them to even put them in some of the rural areas. Why not just do what's right to ensure that people have simple health care? So that would be it. Because listen, if you have healthy people, everything else will fall in line.
For sure, right? Absolutely, yeah. Well, friends, if you have a question for Senator Jones, I've got another couple that I'll ask him. But if you have one or two, you can put those in the chat box, and we'll try to get those asked of him before he needs to head out tonight. But we have a question that simply says, according to the article in the Tampa Bay Times, Florida's charter schools and voucher-funded private schools are mostly exempt from HB 7, HB 1557, and 1467 because they apply to the Florida statutes chapter relating to district school board powers, a section from which charter schools are exempted. Is this accurate? And if so, doesn't this violate the Florida Constitution mandate, which requires the state to provide a uniform, efficient, and high-quality system of free public schools?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. That the short answer is yes. But I'll also remind you that what we're seeing with this uptick in voucher programs in schools across the state of Florida, many of them, well, all of them, they are not held, to the same accountability standards that's needed within our public schools. Listen to this, but they are the same tax dollars that you are given to these programs, the same tax dollars. And hear me what I'm saying. Yeah, if parents want to have the choice, that's perfectly fine. I don't believe that's the argument. The argument is that if our tax dollars are paying for these programs and these schools that have no accountability, not just programmatic accountability, but even financial accountability. What do you mean, Shevrin? I can send you all an article before I leave. There was a school in Hialeah just yesterday. The children showed up to school, and guess what? No one was there. The school has shut down. 103 children. And guess where they're going now? They're going to the public school. And guess who has the money? Not the public school system. The money is still with the provider. So in my freshman year, I filed a bill. I said, well, maybe we can do this. I said, maybe let's make sense of this. If you're going to take tax dollars and you want to open up a school, okay, cool. Put up a surety bond. Just in case your school don't open, the teachers who you hire can be paid. And then you can give the money that the state is giving you back to the school district so they can rightfully disperse it. I know you know that can't go anywhere, but it was just the idea. And that's the type of environment that we're working in Tallahassee.
It did go anywhere, okay.
I know.
Imagine that, right?
It makes sense, all right,
Yeah.
You would think.
Absolutely. All right, we have a question in our chat box. We'll let that be our last one for you, Senator Jones, and then we'd love to hear if you have any final words for us or any takeaway. But the question is coming from Miranda. She writes, what can we do to guard against multifaceted attempts of voter suppression, i.e. changing rules around requesting mail-in ballots?
So I think that we're going to have to work just a tad bit harder to debunk But even while we're in the process in debunking, we're going to have to engage all at the same time. They've made it extremely hard for us to not just register voters, but they've made it hard for individuals, the conveniency of voting. As you all know, everyone who were on absentee ballot, was receiving absentee ballots, excuse me, have to re-register to get their absentee ballots. I think we're just gonna have to do an extra effort. I just told a group yesterday when they said, you know, what can we do when it comes to voting? I said that we need to put our sneakers on. It's really we're going to have to go back to the old school way in grassroots and knocking on doors and making sure people are informed. I think we've gotten so lazy with social media. We think we can post and tweet our way out of this, and it's just not how this is going to work. Ms. Johnson is still in her house. Ms. Jones is still in her house, and they like to see face to face. And I think we need to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So Senator Jones says, get your sneakers ready. We've got some organizing and not getting to do. Thank you so much, Senator Jones, for being with us. Any other practical kind of next steps or tangible actions you'd encourage us to take as you leave us this evening?
Yeah, you know what? Yes, I'll give you 3 things that I shared with a crowd of people last night when they were asking what they can do or what we can do. One of the things I gave to leaders within communities, whether county commissioners, city commissioners, state reps, and state senators, and that was to put together community legislative task force and or working groups where they can bring communities together to help them formulate policy ideas and speak to the needs of all of us. What does that do? There was I purposely went back to look at how politicians in the old days used to, without social media, how were they able to do this? It was through community meetings, it was through churches, it was through meetups at homes and things of that nature. It was through community captains. And so I charged the group yesterday to let's go back to that. We have Zoom now. We're gonna have to meet in people's home. We can create groups in Zooms to have these same type of connections, just like these communities that we're having right now, even to the ones who are here now. How do we leave here and create this huge group of over 100 to be a group of 5, 10, and begin to organize communities? And also, I asked people to create community boot camps. A lot of people don't know how to what politics is. They don't know what government is, and they're not teaching civics like they used to. And so let's do it within the community. Let's create these workshops to do it. I even invite you all to come on February 4th. Every other month, my office do what's called We the People University, and our next one is on February 4th. And I can send this information to anyone. It's always packed. People come. And it's like you're registering for school. You go online to Eventbrite. You pick your classes that you would like to take, and it's free. We feed you breakfast. We feed you lunch, and people leave so fulfilled. And when we stay in contact, and they created their own communities just from that. And so these are some of the things that I'm doing, and I'm hoping that other leaders can continue to do to engage people in this process. Not 2 months before election, and not 6 months before election, year round.
Yeah, year round. That's so great. That's so needed too, right? Engaging each other in community. So like Senator Jones said, we got a group here already. That's a great event. It sounds like on the 4th, we'd love to have more information about that so we can get that out to our folks.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Share that with everyone. Absolutely. All right, well, thank you so much for taking time to join us and for updating us and giving some more pointers and encouraging all of us. We encourage you in your work that you're doing as well, and appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Nathan. Shout out to Michelle. I see you back there. I saw you earlier.
Monica comes now to introduce Michelle as we continue tonight's conversation.
Thank you, Senator Jones. And now I'd like to introduce Michelle Jarrett. She's the immediate past president of the Florida Association for Media and Education and the current president of the Florida Association of Supervisors of Media. She has been a school library media specialist since 2004 and is a library supervisor for the school district of Osceola County. Michelle, the floor is yours.
I'm so excited that I get to follow Senator Jones A little nerve-wracking, but thank you. I thank you so much for inviting me tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, apart from that introduction. So yes, I am the library supervisor for a school district in Central Florida, but I have been the president of the Florida Association for Media and Education 2 times. And most recently, I finished my presidency at the end of 2022. Additionally, I am the president of the Florida Association for Supervisors of Media. Both of those organizations are professional organizations that represent school librarians and school library media supervisors in the state of Florida. But here's a little bit about myself. I so firmly believe in the power of school libraries. I grew up in the projects outside Chicago in Northwest Indiana. Hammond, Indiana is where I'm from. My kids are native Floridians. I've been here since 2000. But that's a little bit of my background. My parents were divorced. We did not have a lot of money. My mother was a server. We called them waitresses back then, but my mom was a waitress growing up. And our only access to information was the school library. This is before the internet. This is, we didn't live in a community where the public library was super accessible for a time. And the school library is that great equalizer, because in public education, that's the place that every kid has access to high quality literature and access to information. And so I am so passionate about the power of school libraries and the power of books in our kids' lives. And that's why these last couple of years have been so disheartening and hard in our field because of what's happening. So as Senator Jones said, we're talking about charter law or charter schools and the laws that have happened. So there were 3 education laws that were passed in the last legislative session. One is House Bill 7, one is House Bill 1557, which we call the Don't Say Gay law. And then you have 1467, which applies specifically to school libraries. What's interesting about that, there's 2 things. Number one, most charter schools do not have a school library or a school librarian. So that access to information that we're giving our public school children is not always accessible to our charter school children. And I think that does a disservice to them. The Commissioner of Education, Manny Diaz, right now, he is deeply ingrained in the charter school organizations, and they do not put the same requirements and the same stipulations on charter schools to provide a school library to all of their children. So all of these laws, specifically 1467, but the others as well, do not apply to our charter schools. In my particular county, out of our 30 charter schools, we have 1 school library, and everything else is what's available in the classrooms. What's interesting about that is that so 1467 was passed, and Senator Garrison, who was the sponsor of that bill in the Senate, put the onus, that bill puts the onus on the Department of Education to implement the law. So some things that are in that law actually make sense, but there's some things that don't make sense. And then there's some things that the Department of Education have done or has done that are far-reaching. So the bill states that everything in a school library needs to be chosen by someone with media specialist certification. That's great. It says that books that are chosen need to be peer-reviewed by reputable journals. That's great. It says there needs to be a training for media specialists provided by the Department of Education. And it says that everything on an elementary school library needs to be searchable in an online format by title and author. All of that is fabulous. A couple of things. It also requires districts to report challenged books to the Department of Ed, where they create a repository of books that have been challenged so that everyone in the state can see what's been published or what's been challenged by a school district. That's the part that we, as the Florida Association for Media and Education and FASM, have had difficulty with, because we know that there's 67 counties in the state of Florida, and every one of them is different. And we want to make sure that we're representing the members of those communities. But what's interesting is that the Department of Education proposed a rule that the Board of Ed passed, and it went into effect on November 22nd. And then there's another one that is up for discussion on January 18th in Nassau County at the next Board of Education meeting. And those rulings, or those rules, are classifying all classroom libraries under the umbrella of school libraries. So what they're basically saying is that everything available for children for self-selected reading at a school is under the umbrella of a school library, which means that only the school librarian can choose books that are at a school and available for self-selected reading. So that's everything in a classroom library needs to be chosen by the media specialist. And then they're implementing all kinds of rules to go along with that. I know as an educator, and other educators can speak to this, we're constantly making sure that we have a print-rich environment for all of our students, and now requiring all of those books that are in a classroom to be chosen by the librarian takes the responsibility, but also the ownership off of a school teacher, and negates the ability they have to select literature for their students. One of the other things, oh gosh, thank you, holy cow. Okay, so the other thing really quickly is that this law required this training as part of the Department of Ed, and that training was released on January 1st. I was part of the work group for the training, and there were 8 media specialists and library supervisors and 4 parents representing a variety of opinions in the state of Florida. After we left the training on December 19th, the creation of the training, the Department of Ed added information to that training, specifically stating that books need to be, do not indoctrinate children, and that if you're not comfortable reading a book aloud in a public setting, that it shouldn't be in your school library. So many of the things that came from that Department of Ed training directly are against best practices in school libraries. So I invite everyone to please take a look at that. You can comment on the Department of Ed's rule site, because that will be up on January 18th, but you'll see a lot of that in the media now, because it's definitely not following best practices for school libraries. Thank you, Monica. I tried.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. For the audience, something we've just realized is that for the chat, that you're not able to send questions to everyone, and that you can only send questions to specific individuals. And so if you'll send your questions to either Pastor Nathan Adams or myself, Monica Elliott, then we'll be able to ask your questions. So if you'll just, instead of trying to do everyone, because that doesn't seem to be working, direct them to Pastor Nathan Adams or to myself. Nathan, I'll let you do the next introduction. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Monica, and thank you so much, Michelle. Well, friends, our next speaker is Roberto Fernandez III. Roberto Fernandez III is a historian and residence at History Fort Lauderdale and an adjunct instructor of history at Florida International University. Mr. Fernandez served as a social studies teacher from 2005 to 2022, teaching various history courses, including African and African-American history. Mr. Fernandez research focuses on the preserving and documenting African-American cemeteries in Florida. He's received numerous awards for his teaching and public history work. His 2 children attend Broward County Public Schools. Welcome, Mr. Fernandez. So glad that you're here today.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to the host for organizing this wonderful get together. So one of the things that I kind of want to piggyback on what Michelle was saying, she was focusing on media, and there have been questions about what an instructional material is versus an educational material. And really it's just, a matter of, they kind of mean the same thing. And so in looking up, let's see, what's the best term and what's the best definition, what I ended up finding was that state statute 1006.29 section 2 says that as items having intellectual content that assist in the instruction of a subject or course, instructional materials may be available in the form of a consumable. A package consists of hardback or softback textbooks, electronic content, learning laboratories, electronic media, computer courseware, and software. So really it's anything that is used to teach students. We can even take it a step further and say lesson plans are also instructional materials, because those are like the step-by-step instructions of how courses are taught. And so then the question becomes, well, how are instructional materials developed? And, for most teachers, and, this is what I did when I was teaching in the classroom, is I would kind of start with state standards. The state has a set of standards. They're based on grade level, and the standards stipulate you must teach this, you must teach that. So, in addition to the state standards, there are also learning mandates. And the learning mandates can be found in state statute 1003.42, and this is required instruction. And if you go and you review that statute, you will find that there's a variety of topics that are included in this. So I'm just going to cherry pick some of these for the sake of time, but flag education, including proper flag displaying and flag salute. The elements of civil government, the history of the United States, including the period of discovery, early colonies, the history of the Holocaust. We have the second week of November is designated as Holocaust Education Week, the history of African Americans, including the history of African people before the political conflicts that led to the development of slavery, the passage to America, the enslavement experience, abolition, and the history and contributions of Americans of the African diaspora to society. So in addition to that, we have kindness to animals, the history of the state, conservation of natural resources, comprehensive and age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate K-12 instruction on health education that addresses concepts of community health, consumer health, environmental health, and family life, including injury prevention and safety, sexual health, self-awareness and self-management, responsible decision-making, resiliency, relationship skills, and conflict resolution. And I can go on. And I hope that the takeaway that you get from this is that there really is a lot of material that has to be covered by state statutes. And I know that educators throughout the state are doing that as our school districts, and for some of these mandated areas, there are state task forces. For example, for the Holocaust and for African American history, there were created 2 specific task forces to advise the Commissioner of Education on the topics of the Holocaust and on African and African American history. And so, we do have these state standards, we do have these responsibilities, and then it's like, well, how about parental rights? Have parents always had the right to be engaged in education? Absolutely. I don't know any teacher in any classroom in this state or in this country that don't want parents involved. We want the parents to be involved. We want them to be part of our collaboration. It takes a village to educate a child, and sometimes educators feel that the parents aren't available, or aren't there. And so, when it comes to House Bill 1557, okay, yeah, parental rights in education, parents have always had that right. We can look at the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, which is an old piece of legislation, but that really covers what parents have access to all the time. So, I do want to take a second to go to share a personal thought with you related to standards and relating to be a parent. So my eldest daughter is now in 6th grade. Last year, she was in 5th. And in May, I remember when she came home and she had just received the instruction on sexual health education with the school district. And so she asked me one night, she goes, "Dad, how does sex work? Like, I don't understand how it works." And it was one of those things where I'm like, okay, what led you to have this question? Like, where did this come from? Oh, we've had science this week, and in our science class we were talking about sex all week. And so I'm not sure how a penis goes into a vagina. And so it's like, okay, age appropriate kind of question considering what she learned. And so I was like, what's in the curriculum for sexual health in Broward County Public Schools? And so I Googled it. And I was easily able to find on the district website, here's where all the lesson plans are. So I went to 5th grade, I downloaded the file with the lesson plans, and I was able to look at, the sexual health education curriculum. And so after reviewing it, I'm like, okay, now I understand what they taught her, what the lesson plan called for her to learn. And so then I was able to speak to her kind of like, again, in an age appropriate way. Like, I don't need to tell you the functions of it, but yes, a penis does get enlarged when it's aroused. And so that's, kind of how it happens. A penis goes into the vagina, like, basic things like, okay, this is kind of gross, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Like, okay, but do you have any other questions? Because, good night, mama. Sorry, my daughter's going to sleep. So these are important conversations, and, parents have always had rights and access to this. And, so I just want people to know, like, parents, get involved in education, go to the school board meetings. Your voices matter as much as the ones that we're hearing in the media and stuff like that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fernandez. Thank you for that reminder again, that information is available, and encouraging folks to go and to find it as needed. Absolutely. Thank you also for being here with us. Monica, introduce our next speaker tonight.
So our next speaker this evening is Barbara Segal. She has 19 years in the classroom teaching social studies, U.S. government and politics, and U.S. history for 17 years at the Fort Lauderdale High School and 2 years at Parkway Academy Charter High School. She has participated in hundreds of hours of professional development, including the federally funded Teaching American History Grant, the Bill of Rights Institute, and the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History. She is also principal for Temple's Religious School, and her child attends a Broward County Public Elementary School. Barbara.
Thank you so much, Monica. I forgot that I wrote that stuff. I'm like, wow, I have done a lot of things. Thank you. Thank you all for having me tonight. This is awesome. I think that I'm going to piggyback on a couple of our other speakers that, every time we mention the Parental Rights Act, it boils my blood, because we've always had access to our children's education. Not even if you're a teacher or you're involved in education, then but if your child comes home with a questionable assignment or a poor grade, you would get in touch with your school, the guidance counselor, the teacher, an assistant principal, and there you go. You have direct access to your child's education. But besides that, I wrote down a little bit of my past life experiences that brought me into the classroom, because I kind of feel like that helps as well. Before I started teaching, I worked for the Israeli government for a year. And before that, I worked at a law firm. I never wanted to teach because my mother is a career teacher, almost 40 years in the classroom. And I said, no, I'm not going to teach. You're not going to make me teach. But turns out I'm good at it, and I like it. So there's that. But over the years, I've taught world history. I've taught a freshman training course to teach them study skills. My passion falls with U.S. history and U.S. government politics and economics that I teach today. When I found out that I'd be sitting on the panel talking, I started chatting with some of my colleagues about how this is going to impact them in the classroom. And, after, I think, 2012, If you are hired as a teacher, you are on annual contract, which really doesn't provide you as much stability and security as a teacher before that, where you are, a professional contract. Having that stability when summer starts and school ends, you know that you're coming back to school in the fall. And for a lot of our younger teachers, or I call them the baby teachers because they're little, they have this insecurity because they're handed a state prescribed curriculum that you can find on a website called CPalms, the letter C and Palms. If you type that into your magic Google machine, it'll pop up and it shows you the state standards. It shows you everything that the class is to teach. But some of some of the subject matter is a little scary for some of our newer teachers. Those of you that are familiar with Fort Lauderdale High School, you know that we were the first school in the county to bring the Cambridge program, which is a prestigious program that children take courses and it mirrors the English or the British school system. And when they complete and take several exams over their high school career, they essentially can enter high school or enter college with an Associates of Arts degree, saving like $30,000 for the family. But some of the courses might be a little questionable today with some of this legislation, like a class called sociology. It teaches Marxism. It criticizes capitalism in a manner where you can have a good spirited intellectual debate where the children learn about different governmental structures in other countries. That might be something a little uncomfortable for an annual contract teacher. We also teach a course called Global Studies, which again targets some controversial worldwide topics that might not be something that our governor would find comfortable to be teaching in the classroom. Now, I teach government. It's somewhat questionable sometimes. I know that next year, the new standards are going to be implemented in the government classes, and we've taken out some court cases that are no longer important, I guess, to the Florida Department of Education and Governor DeSantis. I think it's important to teach Roe v. Wade. It's part of our privacy rights, but we don't get to teach that. There are also many First Amendment court cases that have been wiped from the curriculum for next year. I'm sad about that because, in order to teach our children to be critical thinkers, we have to present all different types of information to them. One thing that I was writing down, taking notes while we were listening. This past summer, I took a class to learn about the new standards. It was a course that the Department of Ed came down to Broward College to teach us on them. And the class was very skewed. It was nothing like how I would teach in my classroom because I present all the information to the kids and I let them take their own opinions. Screen sharing. Yay. So I have I sent Susan some slides from the actual workshop if it's possible. Because there were some concerning slides, like the separation of church and state. We've all heard that. Our workshops, rather than a separation, it was more like a thin veil, and that our founding fathers in these broad generalizations were mentioned that they all wanted us to be teaching a Bible essentially in the classrooms. And I kind of went a little nuts over that and ended up researching a whole ton where Thomas Jefferson said just the opposite. He's the one that coined the phrase, the separation between church and state. John Adams, our second president, said something very similar where Our founding fathers did not confer with the gods when they wrote the Constitution. The Constitution was written by man. Another thing that made my blood boil was the famous phrase in our Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. We know what that means today. All men are created equal. Men is really people, and we are all, created equally. However, in one workshop, that's what they said. It's all of us, that's come to mean all of us. But then in the next workshop, they were talking about originalism and looking at the Constitution literally. And so if we're looking at the Constitution literally, then how can we expect that all men are created equal to be women, African Americans, and white folk? So it's it was very confusing and unsettling. Wow, there were so many quotes that were taken out of context where they provided us a line. They talked about the importance of teaching primary source documents. So I agree. We should absolutely teach primary source documents. And in my government class or my AP class, one of our textbooks is something called the Constitution. I get constitutions, little pocket constitutions for my kids every year. And we go through it with highlighters and we annotate in the margins and we mark it up well. But primary sources in this workshop, we're talking about just take a line out of it. Frederick Douglass's "To a Slave Is July 4th." I was actually taught in this workshop that it was that he was in favor of July 4th and being an American. He was proud to be an American with all that came with it. So I don't know where we stand. I have more things to say, but I'm going to stop right now.
Thank you. That was very good. Nathan, I'll turn it back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Barbara. Simply just say that for those of us that identify as Christian like myself, Thomas Jefferson had a very different understanding of Christianity than many of us do today. So just put that out there as well. Our last speaker, our last panelist this evening, before we hear some Q&A, we're joined tonight by Bacardi Jackson. Let me tell you a little bit about Bacardi, graduate of Yale Law School. Bacardi Jackson is a labor, employment, and civil rights attorney and social justice advocate. She currently serves as interim deputy legal director for Children's Rights Practice Group at Southern Poverty Law Center. She oversees work dedicated to protecting children by stopping the school to prison pipeline and ensuring equitable access to mental health services and high quality public education. Ms. Jackson has been recognized as a Florida super lawyer from 2020 through 2023. An active member of her community, Jackson has served on many nonprofit boards as a pro bono counsel for several nonprofit organizations as well. She is the proud mother of 3 school-aged children. Welcome, Bacardi. Glad to have you here with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this very interesting and robust discussion with such experienced advocates. It is a delight to have this conversation, and it's an important one to have. The work that we do at the Southern Poverty Law Center is against the backdrop of the undeniable truth that although great progress has been made, we have systemically and sometimes intentionally undereducated and miseducated Black and brown children in our country. And over time, we have simply created more nuanced and facially neutral ways, but no less racially consequential ways to do that. We still have unacceptable outcomes that put a disproportionate number of Black children in the pipeline of prisons. We know that there is little chance that Black and brown children will receive education on par with their white peers. According to the 2019 Ed Build report, there is a significant persisting gap, namely a $23 billion gap between white and non-white school districts in this country, even when they serve the same number of children. White school districts average annual revenues of about $14,000 per student, but non-white student districts receive about $11,600. That's over $2,200 on average per student per year. So along with these funding disparities within our public education system, we know there's another insidious reality that enables white flight, and it poses a growing threat to equitable funding of the education for Black and Brown and other marginalized children. Following Brown v. Board, some of you may know there were more than 200 private segregation academies that were set up across states in the South, and they maintained these tuition grant programs. They gave vouchers to incentivize white students to leave desegregated public school districts. And the legacy of those segregation academies is still very much alive and well and still growing. And so this is why public education has always been at the heart of the civil rights struggle. Our public schools, despite their many faults, are the cornerstone of our democracy. And they are under attack today in ways that are unprecedented in my lifetime. And it includes this legislation that we've been talking about this evening. At the SPLC, we've been working really hard trying to connect the dots between the defunding and the destabilization of public education and the racist, classist, anti-LGBTQ, and xenophobic agenda of the powerful forces that are seeking to privatize education. I love this quote. Carol Corbett Burris, who's the executive director of the Network for Public Education Foundation, she said, the end game is really to have an education system that the public doesn't pay for. Rather, parents will pay with some subsidies for poor children. It will be a stratified system where wealthy kids receive the absolute best education. Kids in the middle will probably receive a decent education, and kids that are poor and disadvantaged will sit in a big room in front of computers with someone standing at the door keeping them in. This is the reality that people are trying to steer us to. And to make that point clearer, we work in 5 states at the SPLC: Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi. And in our 5 states, 1 in 5 students in our public schools is below the poverty line. More than half of the students in our public schools are considered low income or are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And 1 in 3 of those students in those 5 states are Black. And so when you look at and understand why public education is funded well below in these states the national average, with 2 great offenders, one being Florida, one being Mississippi, where we underfund education by more than $4,000 per pupil per year than the national average. Not where we should be, but just the national average. You start to understand why that is the case, because we have a lot of children in that school system that people do not care about and have historically and systemically not cared about. So it is in that backdrop, and that we also must look at the reality of what's happening in Florida. As our friends at the Florida Policy Institute have pointed out, school districts in Florida are dealing with crushing teacher shortages, bus driver shortages. The average teacher pay in Florida ranks 49th in the nation in 2020. And we still continue to siphon away $1 billion every year through private voucher schemes. So these culture wars, whether they're about masks or curriculum censorship or books or the disfranchisement of communities to elect their own school board members because our governor decides he gets to choose for us, these are all intended to destabilize our public school system. This propaganda of alleged parental rights is just that, because the rights of only some parents are being elevated while others are being outright trampled. If I want my child to have access to information in a school system, now that is becoming impossible. There are ways that we could, if parents really wanted to just have their rights to decide, still protect both sides of that, but that is not the goal. It has never been the goal, and we must not pretend that it is. We must not sugarcoat what is actually happening. And as we get into this discussion, I think it is really critical for us to think about the historical landscape that we are living in right now. When you go back to looking at how censorship has developed in our country, you can start with the Civil War, when textbook publishers started to remove any content that was critical of slavery. After that, you had the Daughters of Confederacy, who were trying to promote the pseudo history or mainstream history of the lost cause of the Confederacy. They claimed enslaved people were treated well. The South had a culture of honor and chivalry, and the war was about defending states' rights. And this pseudo history was taught again when the Civil Rights Movement became prevalent, and it was to counter the support for the growing support for racial equality and to encourage white supremacist policies like Jim Crow laws. So when you think about censorship, white supremacy is a central feature of that narrative. As late as 1960s, textbooks were describing slavery as a mostly beneficial institution devised by benevolent white people to civilize savage Africans. This is not that long ago. And then you jump to the 20s and you can see where we were banning books on evolution. And in the 30s, we saw the most effective use of censorship to destroy democracy in Germany. It became illegal to criticize the German government, and books were banned and burned for being un-German, just like we are talking about the language of un-American and things that make us uncomfortable. So we fast forward now to DeSantis's Florida, and we did not get here by accident. This is intentional. In response to the murder of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, and the international Black freedom movement that rose up and that followed that treacherous murder, DeSantis called for, and he helped the legislature pass HB 1, which was the anti-protester bill. We, along with the Public Rights Project, fought that law and are still fighting that law, but he and his cronies like Christopher Rufo didn't stop there. They delved into how can they permanently quell demands to end structural and systemic racism that came out of that Black freedom movement, and how in the process of doing that, they also defund and destabilize public education. And it was just 1 year after HB 1 that he, invoking Dr. Martin Luther King, proposes the Stop Woke legislation to really get to the heart of how do you destroy any future Black freedom movements. So we cannot sit around and act like this is not history coming back to repeat itself. It is haunting us. And if we are not serious in our response to it, we will be destined to repeat those same horrific consequences.
Thank you so much, Bacardi. I really appreciate that. Reminding us again, systems get the results that they're intended to get, that we didn't get here by accident. Absolutely. Monica's going to kick off our time of question and answer. We've got some questions that are prepared ahead of time. Again, if you have a question that you'd like to ask our panelists tonight, again, we thank each of you for joining us and presenting tonight. You can either send your question in the chat box directly to one of the co-hosts, myself or to Monica, and we'll do our best to share those and ask those as time allows. Monica, you want to kick us off?
Okay, and I have to apologize. I'm supposed to have been the timekeeper on all this, but when our panelists start speaking, I get so caught up in what they're saying that I forget to look at my timer. So we may not have as much time for questions, but it's just been so wonderful so far. So one question I have in the chat is how, and this would be for Michelle, how procedures for handling challenges to library and instructional materials changed as a result of HB 1467. She's curious if a book like Uncle Tom's Cabin would be on a statewide banned book list.
That's a great question. 1467 hasn't actually changed any of the challenge policies. What's been interesting in the last year and a half in the state of Florida is that school boards have chosen to not follow their published policies. So, for example, you see in districts where members from far right groups will come read aloud from a specific book, they'll read a section of it, read it aloud, and create an uproar, and then school boards respond without them following any of the procedures that they actually have in place. So 1467 it doesn't say anything about school board policies in terms of that. But what's interesting is that the training that went out to the media specialists speaks to the fact that if you are not comfortable reading something aloud in a public setting, that it shouldn't be in a school library. And what we find interesting, and really what's not accurate about that, is that there are many things that we would not read aloud in public that certainly should be available for students for self-selected reading and inquiry. For example, Uncle Tom's Cabin or Tom Sawyer, or, many things. I'm not comfortable reading some of those words aloud, but I certainly think they're important for the students of Florida to learn about. So for the Department of Education to put that stipulation in the narration of the training, that if you're not comfortable reading something aloud, it shouldn't be in a school library, is false and frightening, because we want to make sure that our kids have access to literature and information, and we don't want to sugarcoat the information that we're giving them, nor do we want to eliminate information that helps them think critically about the world around them. I love when Barb was talking about the ACE curriculum, the Cambridge curriculum. That's one of the great things that we actually have in Florida, because our kids get an international perspective about things rather than what's coming down from the Department of Ed right now, with this increase in making everybody feel comfortable with the information that's out there. They don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, kind of thing. So
Okay.
The book banning, yeah, I mean, it's district related, and they're definitely school districts themselves are not following their own policies when it comes to that.
Okay. Nathan, do you have a question in your chat box?
I do. Before we move to that, I think Michelle, you had mentioned, I think it was you earlier, about being able to comment on library policy. Someone was asking if you'd have the ability to put that in the chat box.
I can absolutely put that link in the chat box. The Department of Ed meeting, I think either today or tomorrow was the last day to comment on that. So definitely that's a great opportunity for our viewers today, or our members today.
Okay, great. And I think we can, as co-hosts, can send it to everyone. So hopefully everyone will be able to see that. If not, we'll try to get it out another way. A more general question, I think this is probably for anybody that wants to jump in on it, but what do you see as an effective, serious response is what the question is. What do you see as effective, serious responses, I guess, to the various legislation and pieces of information we've heard tonight?
I'm happy to jump in on that. I think one of the things that is really important is that we have to remember all of us have a role to play. There is no one response. It is going to take an integrated advocacy approach where we are thinking about the legislative solutions. We are thinking about the litigation possibilities of pushing back against these unconstitutional laws. And we are also thinking about community education and advocacy and outreach and research. All of these things are really important. And most importantly, we have to show up. If we are, as I think someone mentioned, if only, the mothers of white cisgender heteronormative colonizer supremacy show up at the board meetings, that's what's going to have the greatest impact on the policies that we are seeing in our school districts. We have to have other voices present, calling to account and holding accountable the people who've been elected or who've been set there by DeSantis. We have to hold them accountable, and they have to hear the voices of all parents, not just those who want to restrict and censor and ban, but also the parents of those children who will feel marginalized, who will be erased, who will be disfranchised, and who will suffer the long-term consequences of living in a society where people are blaming them for the realities that we've created through systems and structures.
I'd like to add to that real quick as well, with just the idea of we all have the right to vote. And one of the things that I can't help but stress is that 46% of the citizens of Broward County voted in the last election. 46%. Where's everybody else? And we had a lot of people that failed to return absentee ballots, and a lot of people that just didn't come out to vote. Where are you? If you call yourself an ally of the LGBTQ plus community, if you call yourself an ally of the Black community, Latino community, of women's rights, where are you when it comes to voting? You know, that's one of the most important things that we can do, and it's not that difficult. The other thing is, if you know that there's a community event that people are going to be attending and that there's going to be a certain, you know, demographic of people that you disagree with, go to the meeting. You know, this is organized by a church community. As allies of our community, come out, hey, you know what, I disagree with this idea, and I don't want this mom or this dad or this group to represent me as a Christian or as a member of whatever religious community you subscribe to or you don't subscribe to. Like, show up, represent. We're all allies. So make your voices heard and vote.
Well, of course, I love that. The league loves that. I do have a question for Barb Segal. What can teachers do to protect themselves while teaching accurate history?
That's a great question. Well, you know, it's actually kind of funny that you asked this, because teachers who teach accurate history, they have nothing to fear. Period. I know that the laws right now seem very scary, but if you're teaching accurate history and you're doing it in an effective manner, teach, do it. Get the children to be passionate about history. It's such a hard subject to teach because, one, it's complicated, and two, kids feel like they don't want to learn it because it's boring. But if you teach it in a way that makes it interesting, these children are going to love it, and you're not going to get in trouble. Also, you should probably join your local teachers union just to have a little bit of insurance in the background.
Thank you, Barbara.
If I can jump on a little bit after that as well, it's also about teaching both sides or trying to teach multiple perspectives. So one of the things that I've done in the past is I've taught, I've done tours of a historic Black cemetery in Fort Lauderdale called North Woodlawn Cemetery. And so one of the things after the recent legislation is, well, you got to show both sides if possible. So, okay, great. That actually works out in my favor more than just doing Woodlawn Cemetery. Now I take kids to Woodlawn Cemetery, and then I also take them to Evergreen Cemetery. So they go to the historic Black cemetery and the historic white cemetery. And I don't have to tell them anything. They can see it for themselves. There's an interstate that runs across a third of the Black cemetery. There's a bustling river that runs behind the white cemetery. You know, the city roads are part of the cemetery system at Evergreen, but not at Woodlawn. You know, so I don't have to influence students' decisions. I just say, hey, what are the differences that you notice? And I back up from there. How do these things tie into what you have learned in my history class? I don't have to persuade them. I don't have to indoctrinate them. I can let them come up with their own conclusions and make their own hypotheses and make their own arguments based on what they see. And so with any historical conversation, that's kind of part of that good teaching that Barb was talking about, is teach it right. Give them the perspectives. Here's the documents. Look at it. Make your own conclusion. I'm not going to tell you what to think.
And if I can just jump in quickly on the protection of our educators who are on the front lines, I do want to mention we had been working in partnership. SPLC actually represented, some of you may recall, Amy Donofrio out of Jacksonville, who was put in teacher jail for having a Black Lives Matter sign. We represented her, and one of the things that was really important and interesting about that case is that she also had an enormous amount of support from her students. It is critically important that we don't leave our educators standing alone. As community members, as other teachers in the same school building, as students, as parents, it is really, really important that people stand with our teachers. The NEA is, had set up a fund to try to make sure there is some sort of resources available for people who are members of the union to be able to access, some kind of representation. There's a clinic at Howard University that has also made similar offers for teachers who might be targeted. But beyond that, beyond just the legal protections, there is great protection in numbers. There is great protection when people stand up and say, we will not allow it, and signing petitions and pushing back. Right now, we have teachers who are not only under threat of losing their licensure or being terminated or suspended unfairly, and we've heard about and seen cases of all of these things happening. We also have teachers who are under fire and under personal attack, who are being targeted on social media, who are being called the most vile and despicable names you could imagine, who worry about their very lives, that their families' lives being threatened. I read just a really compelling testimony of a teacher out of Jacksonville who's leaving Florida and to teach somewhere else because of those kinds of vicious attacks. So we must have a response for that is community-based and that says we will not tolerate this kind of treatment of our educators.
Thank you. And absolutely. I can't add to that, Bacardi. Thank you. Absolutely. We've got to stand up and support our educators for sure. I don't see any more questions on my side. Monica, do you have any on yours before we move to a final word from each of our panelists?
I have one question here for Ms. Segal. Since the Department of Education was created, and this is probably true for other panelists also, but since the Department of Education was created, studies seem to show that educational performance of students has declined. Do you think that is the case?
Well, I don't actually have that data, but I can tell you that educational performance of students has decreased. Absolutely. It's a really simple mantra. A happy teacher makes a happy student. And I know it sounds so simplistic, but when the teachers are in the classroom and they're so bogged down by so many other things, in addition to the fear of losing their job for teaching fair and accurate history, kids sense that. They smell fear. They are intuitive humans. That will drive children away from learning. Plus, with all of this testing, we are constantly testing our children with ridiculous tests. It takes away the passion and the love of learning, and it forces them to just be little cogs or little sprockets in a machine, and that's not what we're trying to do. I think it was James Madison who talked about an educated electorate. And the importance of an educated electorate in one of the Federalist Papers. And that's not what we're doing right now in Florida. We're trying to indoctrinate children, or the governor is trying to indoctrinate children in a way that they think the same way as he does. And that's not what an educated electorate is. So I don't have the exact data, but I do know that children have definitely lost their drive and their passion for learning.
And to add to that, the number one factor that impacts student success is relationships with their teachers. But when you have a teacher that doesn't feel like they can build relationships, you're never going to see student success until we continue to do that relationship building.
Yeah, relationships change everything for sure, make a huge impact. Well, we are about out of time tonight, but we want to give each of our panelists an opportunity to just say a closing thought, whether that's just to wrap up your thoughts or give us some marching instructions or things to do as we conclude our time here together. We're going to go through kind of in the order that you all shared with us tonight. So why don't we start back with Michelle?
My number one takeaway or charge to everyone is to pay attention to your school board elections. There's a bill in the House or right now to propose to making school board elections partisan, which would require a school board candidate to declare their party. And I believe that children are not part of a political party and children should be non-partisan. So pay attention to that and recognize that at the ground level, the biggest impact in education happens locally at your school board.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Roberto?
So my big takeaway is please, please, please vote. That to me is the most important takeaway that you can take this evening, and engage in your, elected communities. Go to the commission meetings, go to the school board meetings, there's so many different levels of politics in our community, city meetings, city advisory boards, county advisory boards. So please participate in our government. That's part of being a good citizen. And that's my takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. Barbara?
I guess my takeaway is I'm so floored at how many of you came out tonight, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful that you came to hear us. It means that we as a community want to effectuate change, and that's a beautiful thing. I also just kind of wanted to conclude that before last summer, there were 3 terms that I never knew before. One would be critical race theory, which I had never heard of. Another term was woke. I thought it was just a fun little term that the kids were using. And then the third term that I really didn't quite understand was culture wars. But now, thanks to all of this current legislation, I am well versed on all of them.
Thank you, Barbara. And finally, Bacardi.
I love that, Barbara. And in fact, that's what I have been laughing about as a personal coup. I actually studied critical race theory in law school. And at the time, there were probably a handful of people in the whole country who knew what it was. And now everybody knows what it is. And children love to know what we don't want them to learn, right? So I love that. But I'm going to leave you with, DeSantis invoked Dr. King to pass this insidious law. And I'm going to leave you with my favorite King quote, which I think has to be all of our mantra, as well as the mantra of the people in our family and our communities. And that is, we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men and women willing to work to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively in the knowledge that time is always right to do right.
Thank you, Bacardi. So use time wisely, vote, pay attention to school board elections, and practice gratitude. And so thank you all indeed for coming and presenting with us. Thank you everyone who attended tonight. Monica, you want to wrap us up this evening?
I just want to also thank you to all of our panelists and to everyone who attended. We greatly appreciate it. Just so you know, the League can have fun also. And on January 29th at the Sanctuary Church from 2 to 4 p.m. is our holiday party and thank you party. And everyone is welcome to attend. It's free. All we ask you to do is to go to our webpage, lwvbroward.org. We have an event calendar and sign up. But it's just been wonderful to see so many people come out. And I want to end with something that Ms. Jackson said that just really is great. And that's that public schools are the cornerstone of our democracy. It is the children who are the backbone, and we need to be sure that we have their backs and the teachers' backs on these subjects. And it's really, really very important. Nathan, did you have something else that you wanted to say?
No, just to simply say thank you again. I enjoyed it. It's encouraging on my end and the work that we do at Christ Church. to see you all, to hear from you all, and thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you, everyone. We greatly appreciate your support. Bye-bye. Have a great evening.
Have a good night, everyone.